the house. The frenzy of the youth was accentuated by a flutist a short distance away who was playing a tune in the stirring Phrygian mode. Pythagoras induced the musician to change his air to the slow and rhythmic spondaic mode, whereupon the intoxicated youth immediately became composed and, gathering up his bundles of wood, returned quietly to his own home. There is also an account of how Empedocles, a disciple of Pythagoras, by quickly changing the mode of a musical composition he was playing, saved the life of his host, Anchialus, when the latter was threatened with death by the sword of one whose father he had condemned to public execution. It is also known that Aesculapius, the Greek physician, cured sciatica and other diseases of the nerves by blowing a loud trumpet in the presence of the patient. Pythagoras cured many ailments of the spirit, soul, and body by having to certain specially prepared musical compositions played in the presence of the sufferer or by personally reciting short selections from such early poets as Hesiod and Homer. In his university at Crotona it was customary for the Pythagoreans to open and to close each day with songs, those in the morning calculated to clear the mind from sleep and inspire it to the activities of the coming day, those in the evening of a mode soothing, relaxing, and conducive to rest. At the vernal equinox, Pythagoras caused his disciples to gather in a circle around one of their number who led them in song and played their accompaniment upon a lyre. The therapeutic music of Pythagoras is described by Iamblichus thus: and there are certain melodies devised as remedies against the passions of the soul, and also against despondency and lamentation, which Pythagoras invented as things that afford the greatest assistance in these maladies. And again, he employed other melodies against rage and anger, and against every aberration of the soul. There is also another kind of modulation invented as a remedy against desires. See the life of Pythagoras. It is probable that the Pythagoreans recognized a connection between the 7 Greek modes and the planets. As an example, Pliny declares that Saturn moves in the Dorian mode and Jupiter in the Phrygian mode. It is also apparent that the temperaments are keyed to the various modes, and the passions likewise. Thus, anger, which is a fiery passion, may be accentuated by a fiery mode or its power neutralized by a watery mode. The far-reaching effect exercised by music upon the culture of the Greeks is thus summed up by Emil Naumann. Plato depreciated the notion that music was intended solely to create cheerful and agreeable emotions, maintaining rather that it should inculcate a love of all that is noble, and hatred of all that is mean, and that nothing could more strongly influence man's innermost feelings than melody and rhythm. Firmly convinced of this, he agreed with Damon of Athens, the musical instructor of Socrates, that the introduction of a new and presumably enervating scale would endanger the future of a whole nation, and that it was not possible to alter a key without shaking the very foundations of the state. Plato affirmed that music which ennobled the mind was of a far higher kind than that which merely appealed to the senses, and he strongly insisted that it was the paramount duty of the legislature to suppress all music of an effeminate and lascivious character, and to encourage only that which was pure and dignified. That bold and stirring melodies were for men, gentle and soothing ones for women. From this it is evident that music played a considerable part in the education of the Greek youth. The greatest care was also to be taken in the selection of instrumental music, because the absence of words rendered its signification doubtful, and it was difficult to foresee whether it would exercise upon the people a benign or baneful influence. Popular taste, being always tickled by sensuous and meretricious effects, was to be treated with deserved contempt. See the history of music. Even today martial music is used with telling effect in times of war, and religious music, while no longer developed in accordance with the ancient theory, still profoundly influences the emotions of the laity. The music of the spheres. The most sublime but least known of all the Pythagorean speculations was that of sidereal harmonics. It was said that of all men only Pythagoras heard the music of the spheres. Apparently the Chaldeans were the first people to conceive of the heavenly bodies joining in a cosmic chant as they moved in stately manner across the sky. Job describes a time when the stars of the morning sang together, and in The Merchant of Venice the author of the Shakespearean plays writes, "There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdst but in his motion like an angel sings." So little remains, however, of the Pythagorean system of celestial music that it is only possible to approximate his actual theory. Insert. The mundane monochord with its proportions and intervals. From Flood's De Musica Mundana. In this chart is set forth a summary of Flood theory of universal music. The interval between the element of earth and the highest heaven is considered as a double octave, thus showing the two extremes of existence to be in disdiapason harmony. It signifies that the highest heaven, the sun, and the earth have the same time, the difference being in pitch. The sun is the lower octave of the highest heaven and the earth the lower octave of the sun. The lower octave to G comprises that part of the universe in which substance predominate over energy. Its harmonies, therefore, are more gross than those of the higher octave gram to gram wherein energy predominates over substance. If struck in the more spiritual part, writes Flood, the monochord will give eternal life. If in the more material part, transitory life. It will be noted that certain elements, planets, and celestial spheres sustain a harmonic ratio to each other. Flood advanced this as a key to the sympathies and antipathies existing between the various departments of nature. Continued. Pythagoras conceived the universe to be an immense monochord, with its single string connected at its upper end to absolute spirit and at its lower end to absolute matter, in other words, a cord stretched between heaven and earth. Counting inward from the circumference of the heavens, Pythagoras, according to some authorities, divided the universe into 9 parts. According to others, into 12 parts. The 12-fold system was as follows. The first division was called the Empyrean, or the sphere of the fixed stars, and was the dwelling place of the immortals. The second to 12th divisions were in order the spheres of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, and fire, air, water, and earth. This arrangement of the 7 planets, the Sun and Moon being regarded as planets in the old astronomy, is identical with the candlestick symbolism of the Jews, the Sun in the center as the main stem with 3 planets on either side of it. The names given by the Pythagoreans to the various notes of the diatonic scale were, according to Macrobius, derived from an estimation of the velocity and magnitude of the planetary bodies. Each of these gigantic spheres as it rushed endlessly through space was believed to sound a certain tone caused by its continuous displacement of the aerial diffusion. As these tones were a manifestation of divine order and motion, it must necessarily follow that they partook of the harmony of their own source. The assertion that the planets in their revolutions round the earth uttered certain sounds differing according to their respective magnitude, celerity and local distance, was commonly made by the Greeks. Thus Saturn, the farthest planet, was said to give the gravest note, while the Moon, which is the nearest, gave the sharpest. These sounds of the 7 planets, and the sphere of the fixed stars, together with that above us antichthon, are the 9 muses, and their joint symphony is called Mnemosyne. See the canon. This quotation contains an obscure reference to the ninefold division of the universe previously mentioned. The Greek initiates also recognized a fundamental relationship between the individual heavens or spheres of the 7 planets, and the 7 sacred vowels. The first heaven uttered the sound of the sacred vowel alpha. The second heaven, the sacred vowel epsilon. The third, eta. The fourth, iota. The fifth, omicron. The sixth, upsilon. And the 7th heaven, the sacred vowel omega. When these 7 heavens sing together they produce a perfect harmony which ascends as an everlasting praise to the throne of the Creator. See Irenaeus Against Heresies. Although not so stated, it is probable that the planetary heavens are to be considered as ascending in the Pythagorean order, beginning with the sphere of the Moon, which would be the first heaven. Many early instruments had 7 strings, and it is generally conceded that Pythagoras was the one who added the 8th string to the lyre of Terpander. The 7 strings were always related both to their correspondences in the human body and to the planets. The names of God were also conceived to be formed from combinations of the 7 planetary harmonies. The Egyptians confined their sacred songs to the 7 primary sounds, forbidding any others to be uttered in their temples. One of their hymns contained the following invocation: the 7 sounding tones praise Thee, the great God, the ceaseless working Father of the whole universe. In another the deity describes himself thus: I am the great indestructible lyre of the whole world, attuning the songs of the heavens. See Naumann's History of Music. The Pythagoreans believed that everything which existed had a voice and that all creatures were eternally singing the praise of the